So that is just a FYI for everyone. Our program today will be very informative and engaging as we have very special guests with us today, Rabbi Scott Mitzler and also Imam Usman Khan. But first, and if I have pauses, I'm sorry, I am continuing to admit people into the program. But first, let's get off and talk about lay the outline of the program. We will have two speakers. They're going to have 15 minutes to 20 minutes each to present on the topic presented. Before we start, I want to give an opportunity to Jamar Miles, our student lead, to give a background about what this program is and what its goals are. Secondly, please make sure if you do have a question for our guest speakers to drop me that question on the chat box to the host, me, Muhammad Ahmed, and I'll make sure I'll get that question asked during the question and answer session. Once again, welcome. Please make sure that you have your microphone on mute and so we don't disturb the program or be distracted to the presenters. And at this time, I want to invite Jamar Miles to give an overview of what this program is. Jamar, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Professor, and good evening/afternoon to everybody that is joining us. And welcome to the first installment of the SDSU Cares campaign that we have. Now, what we've done is we've partnered and collaborated with the McCain Institute's peer-to-peer protective project. Now, what that does is it puts professors and students together that work on focused campaigns that are designed to bring awareness and combat and counter the narrative of targeted violence and hate around the world. For the last several weeks of this semester, me and my colleagues, Becky, Gage, Seth, Karina, Caitlin, Shiloh, and Sal, we've worked on a campaign called SDSU Cares. This is designed to educate students, faculty members, and all members of our SDSU community about the dangers that we have centered around violent extremism and hate. Our goal is manifested through our slogan, which is peace through understanding. We want to get at the attitudes by facilitating meaningful dialogue to help bring awareness and understanding as to what issues we might face in an effort to counter the narrative and make and forge bonds that make us more resilient. Despite the adversity that we've all been faced with the global pandemic, we originally had plans to facilitate these meetings in person on campus. But under the circumstances, we're still going to take our own medicine and push through this and remain resilient through SDSU Cares by facilitating this through Zoom. So I hope that through this, we can create some meaningful dialogue, we can educate ourselves and take another step at countering that hate and having and hopefully achieving true peace through the understanding of each other.
Thank you very much, Jamar, for that lovely overview. Once again, this program is focused on understanding extremism and it impacts and how it impacts our faith communities. Particularly, we're going to be looking at our Jewish community and we're going to be looking at our Muslim community. Next week, we have another session focused on how violent extremism impacts immigrant and refugee communities. And the following after that, we will have our last program focused on generally combating hate crimes and looking at prevention and intervention methods that could be useful for various communities across the country. And now I want to introduce Imam Usman Khan. I will read a short bio of Imam, and this is not going to do justice, but nevertheless, Imam Usman Khan is the Imam of Masjid Al-Ribat of San Diego, California, one of the largest in San Diego County. Imam Osman has received his bachelor's in computer science from the National University. Additionally, he has a master's in executive MBA with an emphasis on technology and management from National University. And he is currently continuing his education and earning his PhD at the University of Southern California. In his religious studies, he earned his education at the University of Islamabad, Pakistan, where he studied Islamic Hadith. Imam Osman is an active member in the Muslim community locally and nationally, hosting various educational programs, trainings for youth development opportunities for communities across the country. Imam Osman regularly works to provide critical training on and educational workshops for higher education institutions across San Diego that are focused on understanding Islam, cultural competency, bridging the gaps between various different cultures, and enhancing a culture of mutual respect and understanding. He's a great friend of mine, and I've worked with him on many, many programs at San Diego State and in the community, and it's an honor for me to invite Imam Osman to give his presentation. So Imam, what you'll do is you'll share your screen.
Okay, first thing, it's an honor for me. Can you share the other one, which is CEO Khan? That way I can get the PowerPoint up. This is my cell phone.
No problem. What I can do is I could upload your PowerPoint, and then whenever you want me to hit next, just let me know.
Oh, I mean, can you just share the one that says CEO Khan? Can you share that screen? That should be easier.
I don't have access to your...
Okay, let me do it from here. Apologize for the...
I've uploaded your PowerPoint.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so just let me know whenever you want me to.
Okay, let us begin then. Start with the first slide. Is it on? There we go. First and foremost, I really want to thank Muhammad Ahmed and the class here and everybody who's participating. It's my honor to share with you. And I do want to point out that these issues that we're pointing out to are not just issues that affect the Muslim community. It affects every community. And let me explain. Please click. Keep clicking. Let's do one more. Yeah, there we go. So these are not historic events that happened in the past. These are things that are going on right now as we speak in countries that we live in, like the United States and Europe and other countries like this. And this is not something that is even being reported in many states because discrimination against Muslims, especially after 9/11 and incidents after that, and especially with the rhetoric that has come out from certain political offices, not going to mention any names, Trump, has fueled this on almost a daily basis. We as imams in different mosques, we hear this issue come up with people who apply for jobs, people who go to different schools, and the discrimination they face on a daily basis. Click, please. So the question I want to present to the students and respected rabbi and others here is, when we look at history and when we study history, and myself, I'm a person who loves to study history, when we study about what happened in Nazi Germany, for example, one of the worst crimes against humanity with the Holocaust and the brutality that went on there, I wonder, and I'm sure all of us wonder, how could an entire nation of Germany at that time let Hitler and the Nazi Party carry out the things that they did? I mean, we all believe that in essence, all human beings, whether they're atheists, whether they're Christian or Catholic or Muslim or Jewish or Buddhist or Hindu, we're all in essence good people. I mean, most people have that sense of right and wrong. So how could it be that when we hear about the incarceration of Jews in Germany and others, how could the country stay quiet? Next. and not just Germany. I don't want to just point to one particular incident in history, however horrific it was, but in our own country, in the United States of America, we know during World War II, the discrimination that many Japanese Americans faced, even though there was no basis for it. Many patriotic Americans who were of Japanese heritage, and some that weren't even of Japanese heritage, some that were just accused of being of Japanese heritage, were incarcerated in concentration camps. And today, the same goes on in China and the re-educational camps, whatever you want to call them. It is, again, due to their race that they were incarcerated, no evidence or no political causes that they were supporting or anything like that. And we seem to forget that this happened in our own country. Next. Also, when we look at the civil rights era, when we look at the discrimination, and again, many of these issues that I'm pointing out, it's not that they're done today. We still have anti-Semitism that we're dealing with as a society and as countries. We still have the discrimination against African Americans and Mexican Americans and Japanese Americans. Others are still going on. But the reason I'm pointing out to these incidents, because when we study them in history, when we think about Martin Luther King, and when we think about Malcolm X, and we think about the people that stood up against the open institutionalization of discrimination, the Jim Crow laws and others that happened, we always wonder that what if we were there? Would I be marching with Martin Luther King? Would I be standing up with Malcolm X? Would I be taking part in those freedom marches against the discrimination that was put into place against African Americans in that era? And usually, I think most of us come with the conclusion that, yes, I would be from those people that would stand up against the Nazis, and I would try to help the people of Jewish heritage in Germany escape, and I would be from those people that would stand up against incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, and I would try to help clear up those situations in their minds, and I would stand up for civil rights, as some did at that time. Next. But if we look at ourselves in our time period, is history repeating itself? And are we allowing it to? Hitler didn't just come in one day and start rounding up people in concentration camps. There was a long road to brainwashing and demonizing and scapegoating and blaming Jewish Germans of Germany at that time, to make them seem like the enemy of the state when they were innocent people working hard to earn their living, to live as productive citizens, but they were made a scapegoat. Same thing with Japanese Americans. We have no evidence of any of those people that were put in those concentration camps in America having any ties to the Pearl Harbor attacks or supporting Japan. Rather, it was just a mass hysteria that was brought up against what they called, with the racist terms of the Japs, against America, and innocent people were harmed. Same thing with African Americans. The struggle that has been going on and is still going on. When we look at these struggles, we realize today in our society, there's an uptick in anti-Semitism, in anti-Islamophobia, in xenophobia. And we are seeing things, and as you can see the correlation in the pictures in the PowerPoint, that remind us of what happened in history. Keep going. So when we look at what we found discrimination against Japanese Americans during World War II, we find similar signs coming up against Muslims in America and Europe. Keep going. If we look at some of the propaganda, and this is very interesting. Fox News, I'm sorry, I don't know how that got in there. But if you look at some of the imagery being used, it is eerily similar to what Nazis had used. When we look at some of the verbiage being used, it is very similar to what has been used against Japanese Americans and others. Next. And if we look at what is fact, if we look at statistics, if we look at numbers, if we look at 30 years of data compiled by the FBI, by others, of mass shootings in the United States, for example, if we look at those things, we realize this is not a joke. This is not something that should be taken lightly. People are losing their lives in mosques, in churches, in synagogues, in Sikh temples, because of the hatred that's not being checked, because of those jokes that people make on Twitter, and nobody seems to stop the xenophobic Islamophobia. And again, racist people, unfortunately, are not the most intelligent people. Bigots aren't the most intelligent people. So don't think that when they just hate Muslims, they know who a Muslim is. We have seen shootings at synagogues. We've seen shootings at Sikh temples where not knowingly they thought they were Muslims and attacked them. Let's keep going. Yes, and I want to make sure that people understand that this is reality. If we look at Brenton Tarrant, what he did in New Zealand, and everybody I'm sure knows about on the 15th what he did. This wasn't an isolated incident. If you look at his weapon, it has writings, it has signs that show what Islamophobia, what right-wing talk show hosts and what Fox News and others, what they had said motivated him, and what propaganda motivated him. Continue, please. And these are some of the victims of the attack. If you look at these people, they are not of one nation, they're not of one color, they're not of one race. There are people, there are men and there are women, they are old and they are young. Please continue. Children, this is an actual child that was killed during that terrorist attack. A child of that age, what had he done? What choices had he made? What was he responsible for him to be killed in a mosque while praying, having no responsibility for anything else that happened in the world? And where is the responsibility placed upon us to stop this type of hate before it's carried out on innocent children and women and worshippers, unarmed, praying in mosques? Continue. And again, as I want to point out, the signs that are being thrown, the propaganda that is being used by some of these people, it's not an isolation. It's not that there was just one guy somewhere who decided that he's going to go into a mosque and shoot it up. If you look at the white power movement, if you look at the anti-Semitic movement, if you look at Islamophobia, it has not only been instituted in many of our police departments, and you can see this is just one picture. I mean, there are documented, if you go to CARE, if you go to any of the other civil rights organizations, they have documentation of people from law enforcement that have left anti-Islamic messages on refrigerators of people that they visited. And this is, you can Google it, you can look it up. This is something that we have to be very careful about. Next. Click one more. Yeah, there you go. And I want to again explain that when we talk about the hatred that is promoted against Muslims, it is not just going to affect Muslims. This is sometimes, unfortunately, human beings sometimes falling to their selfish desires. They see somebody making an anti-Semitic joke and they say, oh, well, I'm not Jewish, so what does it matter to me? Or if somebody makes a Islamophobic joke, people say, well, I'm not a Muslim, so it doesn't matter to me. But understand that when hatred gets loose, it harms everybody. On August 5th, 2012, 40-year-old white supremacist and United States Army veteran, he shot 6 people, wounded 4 more at a Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. When he was interviewed, he thought he was shooting Muslims. And not that it would have been justified if he was shooting Muslims, but understand that this hatred then harms everybody. Next. If we look at Andres, and this is well known in July 2011 when he killed 80 people, not only setting off car bombs and buildings, and then shot 69 children at a youth camp. He was a member of a Christian Church of Norway. He described his motivation as a crusade against infidel Muslims of Europe. Now, this man didn't kill any Muslims. He actually went and killed people of all different races, of different people who were regular Christians of the country that he was living in, and other people. But his motivation was to set off a race war. And if you read his manifesto, it's a 500-page plus manifesto that I've unfortunately had to read the whole thing. He's very clear in his hatred for Islam and his motivation that he's taken from right-wing movements in the United States and in Europe against Muslims. But his blind anger made him kill people indiscriminately, children. And this is where hatred leads us. Next. If we look at the spike in hate crimes in the United States, every year it's growing, unfortunately, especially against Muslims. We have seen Donald Trump's Islamophobic tweets directly linked to increase in hate crimes, physical attacks. And I've given references here if somebody wants to look them up. I've given the links here. And Mohammed, please feel free to share these slides with whoever would like to get a copy. So if we as a community, as a society, as a nation don't come together, Jews, Muslims, Christians, atheists, Hindus, Buddhists, all of us, and stand up against this hate that is spewing all over our country nowadays, then understand that people will lose their lives. This is our test. This is our moment. Next. And again, and this is to highlight that I am not talking about just a violence against Muslims. Once you condone the blame on a race or a religion, when you condone that type of stereotyping, that hatred spews. That hatred goes out against Sikhs, as we've shown. It goes out against churches. It goes out against synagogues. In Pittsburgh, as we saw the synagogue shooting, and there have been many, there's been in San Diego since then. And we see the same types of people who tie all of it together. This man, he was blaming Jews for immigrants coming into Europe and the United States, and he used that hate to kill 11 people and injure 7 more. Click. And one thing that we found is many of the Muslim American communities raised money for the victims of the Pittsburgh synagogue attack. Many Muslims, Jews, Christians, and others have raised money to support those in New Zealand. And this is what we need to encourage, a empathy and a sympathy amongst people to understand that we're all part of this nation. We're all human. We all want to live. We all want to raise families. We all look for safety. And when we come together and support each other, then we're going to see that hatred will not find its breeding ground. Next. And that's why we want to focus on building bridges and not walls. I'm here to invite all of you. You are welcome to our mosque or any mosque. We are located by 70th Street off of Saranac. Muhammad knows the mosque. We, unfortunately, right now, due to the coronavirus outbreak, we are not holding services. But usually every Thursday, we have free food served for the entire community. People of different religions, people of different backgrounds are welcome. Free food, just to build bridges, to sit down, break bread. And anytime you guys want to organize a visit to our mosque, you're more than welcome. We have no secret rooms. We have no bomb building facilities. We only have food and tea and water, and you're welcome to come and join us. I think I'll end the presentation here and just open it up for question and answer.
Oh, yeah, we'll leave the, thank you, Imam Osman. We'll leave the questions and answers after our Rabbi Scott Milzer gives his presentation. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you.
In the meantime, if anybody has questions, please send me in the chat box so I'm able to ask the Imam and also the Rabbi after his presentation. Rabbi Scott Milzer. Now, let me give an introduction to Rabbi Scott Smithler. Once again, it is not going to serve justice. Rabbi Scott Milzer serves as a rabbi of Oher Shalom Synagogue in the historic synagogue building located at 3rd and Laurel in San Diego. And Rabbi Scott Milzer is on a teaching faculty in the Religious Studies Department at San Diego State University. Rabbi Milzer serves on the board of directors of the Anti-Defamation League of Southern California and the Hillel of San Diego. He is a past chaplain with the San Diego Police Department and past president of the San Diego Rabbinical Association. Previously, Rabbi Milzer served as the founding dean of students and residential life at the American Hebrew Academy in Greensboro, North Carolina. Prior to that, he was the director of education of the Barden Institute, BBI, and I'm sorry if I butcher that name, and the director of his renewed program, the Bardini's Collegiate Institute, where he was responsible for programs in residential and experimental Jewish education. Rabbi Scott Melser is a good friend of mine and a champion in the San Diego community, really in Southern California and across the country. I've done similar programs like this with him at other institutions, and is a man I really respect and honor. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Treat and an honor to be here. The work that's done, Mohammed, by you and by everybody in your office as part of SDSU Cares, it's critically important work. You know, the reality is the vast majority of people are good people who want good for everybody, but they don't tend to be the loudest people. So for good people to stand together is the single most important thing when we talk about extremism and hate and all the intolerances that plague our society. Let me go ahead and, as I'm sharing the slides, I want to acknowledge, as I begin, and following up from Imam Khan, that those who hate, it's very, very rare to find a single issue hater. And the reality is when we start talking about somebody who spews anti-Semitic rhetoric, that we're confident that they are equally vociferous in their hatred of Muslims, their hatred of women, their hatred of LGBTQ plus individuals, their hatred of immigrants, their hatred of people of color, their hatred of. That it's a fascinating piece of the human psyche, that once one opens up one's heart and mind to hatred, then one can never get enough. So though I'm going to focus for the next 15 minutes on anti-Semitism, understand that the critical message, and again, thank you to Imam Khan for saying it explicitly, is that good people need to stand together. And it's not just about who is at that moment in the crosshairs, sadly, of those who would hate. It's about all of us standing together, because we truly are the majority. We truly are those who carry the standard of love and respect and honor and decency that is shared. Details are different, but the sentiment and the origin is the same across all of our faith backgrounds. And we all stand together as Americans and as members of this 21st century community. I'm going to go relatively quickly, but as we talk about anti-Semitism, and just over a month ago, we celebrated the Jewish festival of Purim, which comes right out of the book of Esther in the Hebrew Bible, and is a story about the Jewish minority immigrant population in ancient Persia. And what's remarkable is, for a story that is a few centuries older than 2 millennia old, that in that book, the hatred of the Jews, it's not about war between peoples. It's about looking at a minority population, and for a hater gaining the ear of the king and saying there are people who live amongst us who are not like us. They act differently. They eat differently. And the result of that being other is that therefore they should be killed. It's a remarkable example of modern anti-Semitism, except for the fact that it's, somewhere around 23 or 2400 years old. Remarkable story. Much more could be said. And we just finished right about a week ago exactly, actually, the festival of Pesach, of Passover. And in the dinner on the first 2 nights, 2 weeks ago, at Jewish tables all around the world, Jewish families saying, V'hi she'amda l'avotenu v'lanu. And so it is for us and for our ancestors that not just one, but violent, hate-filled anti-Semites have stood against us to murder us. And it's a remarkable statement of Jewish history that we are still here. And the prayerful part of that night is, even though b'chol dor v'dor obdim aleinu l'chalotenu, even though that in every generation those haters stood to murder us, to annihilate us, v'akadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. In that context of ritual is the prayer to God that God saved us from the hands of those who would hate. But the remarkable thing about the hand of God that saves people in this world is it usually is the hand that empowers others to work together, to act together. So that rather than standing together and praying that God should save us, then those of us who are motivated as part of a religious tradition stand together in the name of God to demand that all of God's creation should be protected and saved. When I talk, I tend to talk about anti-Semitism as a noun or anti-Semitic as an adjective. I don't spend a lot of time talking about anti-Semites. The general reaction when somebody gets labeled to being an anti-Semite is, no, I'm not. And even people who are clearly filled with hatred of the Jews will reject that label. And it's hard. You know, only God knows what truly lies in the hearts and minds of human beings. But I know what people say, and I know what people do. And so people's words and their actions can be labeled clearly as anti-Semitic. So I don't spend a lot of time labeling people as anti-Semites. I spend much more time, sadly, quoting people and saying that is an anti-Semitic sentiment. We're looking broadly at actions and saying those are anti-Semitic actions that are occurring. And I identify, because I find it helpful, 3 different kinds of anti-Semitism that should be understood and identified wherever they occur. One I call attitudinal anti-Semitism. One I call anti-Israel is anti-Semitism. And one is violent anti-Semitism. And today, when we say violent anti-Semitism, we need to say violent white supremacist anti-Semitism, because tragically we live in a moment where there is a white supremacist ideology that is violent against many people, that is much more public and accepted in public than certainly it's ever been in my lifetime. So attitudinal anti-Semitism. These are all sorts of comments and attitudes that come out that stereotype the Jewish people and all Jews being a certain way. Pretty much any statement that begins that all of some kind of people are X, Y, or Z is probably an intolerant statement, no matter who is the object of that statement. So all Jews are rich, or Jews are stingy and care about money, or Jews control, fill in the blank, banks, the government, Hollywood, right?
Rabbi Mitzler, can I share your PowerPoint? I'm sorry.
Oh, you're kidding me. I thought I shared it.
But I know what slide
I have it right here. No. I just didn't click to share. That's so funny. Thank you for saying so.
Okay, there we go.
In my mind, I clicked to share it. Sadly, my mind and my keyboard are not as connected as I sometimes think they are. Let me see if there are any of those images. So I put up the Hebrew text from the book of Esther, from the beginning of the festival of Passover, the distinction that I would like to talk about anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic and not spend so much time labeling people. And then the 3 types of anti-Semitism I just explained. Thank you for pointing out to me that I was looking at my slides and you were not. And then the set of stereotypes. I had gotten to Roman numeral 4, that there are stereotypes about Jewish women. The classic, whether it's about spoiled but to call a Jewish woman a princess or a Jewish American princess. And then finally, to use the word Jew as a verb, to Jew somebody as some synonym for swindle. Those are all reflective of attitudinal anti-Semitism, and they come up all over the place. And they come up even in groups that pride themselves on not being intolerant, or pride themselves on standing together, or pride themselves on offering dignity for all people. And I'll say it here, and I'll say it again at the end, that I think the obligation on all good people is to call out all statements and actions of intolerance, no matter to whom they are directed. And so I get frustrated. You know, it just happened multiple times last month that the leader of the Nation of Islam spews anti-woman and anti-Semitic comments almost every time that he speaks. And there's an unwillingness for some people to label those comments as anti-Semitic. And it's not acceptable. Anytime we hear of anybody who would peddle in intolerant speech or intolerant acts, all good people are obligated to speak up, whether the target is Jews, Muslims, women, LGBTQ, immigrants, people of color. I could go on, and I apologize that my list is not more extensive. My favorite example, and it makes me cry that it's my favorite example, is our president speaks in anti-Semitic language. Only what makes him truly exceptional is he means it as a compliment. It really is a fascinating moment in American history that the President of the United States publicly talks about his love of the Jewish people, including his son and his daughter, his son-in-law and his daughter, and then trades in anti-Semitic attitudes and assumptions, but he meets them as a compliment. Jews love money more than they care about anything else, right? And he has a whole set of quotations that are clearly anti-Semitic, and they need to be labeled as such. And I say, look, it's not just about people from different minority groups standing together. I say it to Republican friends. I say, you need to stand up when anybody makes an anti-Semitic comment. And don't label anybody as an anti-Semite, but that comment, to say that Jews care about money, to associate that is an anti-Semitic trope that's been around for about a century and a half, if not longer, in our society, and it needs to be identified. Now, the hardest one on my list to talk about is anti-Israel comments as anti-Semitism. I am a huge supporter of free speech and freedom of the press, and I have yet to find a government in the world today or in the history of this world that is not worthy of serious criticism. And so to criticize a government is the right of all peoples. And I would say that about the government of Israel and the government of the United States and any other government that you would list. But when that criticism is biased, when it's based on anti-Semitic attitudes, then it's no longer legitimate criticism of a government. Now, I believe all people have the right to self-determination. I believe that all people have a right to live in a system of fair treatment and justice. I believe that everybody is obligated to speak out against policies. But when people speak about a country in this world, but associate its policies with Jews, then it's anti-Semitic, because there's no Jewish country. We don't criticize Christians because of what America, a majority Christian nation, does, right? So when people say that America supports Israel because Jews control the government, that's an anti-Semitic comment. Or America supports Israel because of Jewish money in politics, that's an anti-Semitic comment. That's got nothing to do with agreeing or disagreeing or protesting policies that are just or unjust. Easy. When people accuse American Jews of not being loyal Americans because they care more about Israel, right? That's an anti-Semitic comment. When people look at in that grand conspiracy theory world that is all around us now and say that Israel is the vanguard of the Jewish attempt to control the world, that's an anti-Semitic comment. Again, nothing to do with agreeing or disagreeing or criticizing with any policies. Again, to take comments about the state of Israel out of any context. State of Israel is the one country in the world shouldn't be accepted as a nation. Ignoring the history and the conversation through the 19th, going back to the ancient times, the Roman period, fine, the 19th to 20th century. To say that Israel is an expression of European colonialism doesn't make sense, right? Not unless we have a conversation about the role of Europe in the formation of every single modern nation in the Middle East from the 20th century forward. To argue that the state of Israel is not a democracy, it's an anti-Semitic comment. To argue it's a flawed democracy is a truism, it's true of any other democracy. But to argue that it's not a democracy, right, without trying to defend on what basis that, when Israel responds, to disproportionately explain Israel's response without any context, right? Now, it doesn't mean you have to agree with it and can't criticize it. Don't. I am no apologizing for violence against, no. But to not put it in the context of a response to whatever violence or whatever the situation is. Okay, now, I can't point out anti-Semitism on one side of America and not point it out on the other side of America, because somebody will accuse me of being more biased than I probably is. A member of the US House of Representatives, a Democrat, said, Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. Now again, people are welcome to pray to Allah. People are welcome to believe that Israel does evil. But Israel has hypnotized the world is an anti-Semitic trope, that the Jews have an international conspiracy to control the whole world. Anti-Semitism is real, and I'm grateful for Jewish allies and colleagues who are educating me on the painful history of anti-Semitic tropes. After her comment, when she was called on it, this was her apology, sincere and lovely. She then went on to talk about needing to get money out of politics. I'm a huge fan of needing to get money out of politics, different conversation. And she, in a tweet, made a comment about AIPAC, the NRA, and the fossil fuel industry as being 3 examples of where money clouds politics. Now that seems reasonable to us in terms of general conversation, but the details are interesting. The NRA in the 2018 national election cycle donated $50 million directly to candidates. That's money in politics. The fossil fuel industry, it's a little bit harder because it's not just one thing, it's a whole bunch of different things. But they come in a little under that from the 2018 numbers. It's just under $50 million to candidates. AIPAC donates $0 to candidates. Now, it would seem to me that if you're talking about money in politics, that this detail is relevant. Otherwise, it looks like anti-Semitism, Jews and money influencing politics, even though on this list, it doesn't belong. So again, nothing about legitimate criticisms, nothing about diversity of opinions, but out of context, not based on information, and trading in stereotypes or classic anti-Semitic comments. And then tragically, we know all about violent anti-Semitism. From Charlottesville, there's a video that was run on national news from the rally in Charlottesville of 2 men dressed in Nazi-style military fatigues, holding automatic weapons, standing outside of the synagogue or a synagogue in Charlottesville while the Jews are inside having services. I'm telling you that unless you were educated to know that that's not a World War II vintage German weapon, it looks like something taken out of Germany from the 30s and 40s, except it's Charlottesville. Now, nothing violent happened there. Violent things did happen at the rally. Nothing violent happened outside the synagogue, but I have nightmares from that picture. And then, as Iman Khan reminded us, the dreadful shooting at the Tree of Life congregation in Pittsburgh, and we just passed the anniversary a couple weeks ago for the 1-year shooting of the Chabad up in Poway. And the shooter in Poway has taken credit, and I believe the FBI has confirmed it, for the bombing of the mosque up in, I think it's Rancho Bernardo, but somewhere up the 15 North as well. And so we now live in this world. I'm going to move a little quicker through some of these pieces, not because they're not important, but because if you don't remember them, then that's a whole other level of great pain. Now to where we are now in the context of the coronavirus. First, the coronavirus is the next wonderful opportunity for intolerant, hate-filled anti-Semites to see it as part of this Jewish conspiracy. So whether it's this pastor in Florida who believes that the coronavirus striking in Israel is God's punishment to the Jews, or David Duke in Louisiana, who believe that this is all part of Judaism, that is Jewry and Zionism's attempt to undermine the world economic system. The FBI in New York have had a whole variety of investigations and involvements with neo-Nazi white supremacist groups who have been talking about both violent attacks and blaming the Jews for the virus, and wanting to see the virus spread, or actually having, biological warfare threats against Jews and against police. And then all of the other, Zoom bombing and anti-Semitic attacks that have been part and parcel of this past month. It's an interesting thing. Or a tragic thing, better adjective, been part of a whole lot of conversations, as many of us are, about how to adjust to this world where instead of hours sitting in the same room at State, we're doing this through Zoom. And so religious institutions like institutions of higher education are trying to adjust and figure it out. And coming up in a few months are the holiest days of the year for the Jewish people. And so Jews are already talking and planning about where we think we will be in September, and nobody really knows. And what does it mean? Just like, state announced summer school, but everybody's waiting to see. At some point, we'll find out what school's going to look like in late August when school starts up again and all of those sorts of things. And having been through these last number of years where all of these Jewish institutions have worked so hard, countless hours, and invested so much in security because of the threats of anti-Semitic, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, hate-filled violence, now I have to figure out what to do. It was part of a really tough conversation that there's a synagogue, not here in San Diego, but a dear friend back outside of Boston. And they've started to, because they figured out that if they're outside, they are safer in terms of the coronavirus. So it's a traditional synagogue. They don't need their parking lot for the holiday anyway. They've already looked into, well, what if we tent outside and we set the chairs a certain distance apart and we do all of these things so that we can try and accommodate what we need to do for the religious observance coming up for the Jewish New Year in September. And they went very far in this process before somebody said, we just went to that whole thing with keyless entry and identifying every guest and all of the physical things to protect us from cars and so forth. And now we're talking about doing services outside because of it. And it's like, it's a different flavor of it's not damned, not really my favorite word, sort of threatened if you do, threatened if you don't, which is the virus that is most scary right now. Is it the coronavirus, or is it the virus of hatred that's been around a whole lot longer, has killed far more, and for which we have yet to find the cure? So having said that, the last thing that I will say, and with this I will end, was asked about what are best practices. And without a doubt, the single most important thing that we can do is allyship with anybody who is at the moment in the spotlight of somebody who would be hate-filled. And even when it's people with whom we don't have a whole lot in common or with whom we have very serious disagreements, it's irrelevant when it's about hatred. It's kind of interesting. I have a whole social group, and a whole chunk of our time together is because we stand together when somebody gets attacked. I happen to really like Imam Taha Hassan. He's a dear friend who he and I disagree on lots of issues, don't be confused. And we have a great deal of respect for each other. And tragically, most of the time that we get to see each other is on the days when we have to see each other. On the day after the New Zealand attack, on the day after the Poway attack, right? Those are the days that we have to be in the same space, standing together, and the whole world needs to see that people who look different, who act different, who are different, who live different, stand together when it comes time to stare down the haters, because it's about all of us. And thank you very much, Mohammed, for the invitation to be here, and very, very honored.
Thank you very much for joining us and for your very informative presentation. Thank you also to Imam Osman. And now we'll get to the questions and answers. One question that I have from a student is, as faith leaders, and this is both to Imam and Rabbi, as faith leaders, what role do you or faith leaders have in the prevention of violent extremism?
Normally on a panel, I would look at the imam and we would, by eye contact, decide who wants to answer first. I don't even see where he is on my screen at the moment. So I'll go ahead and jump. Oh, please.
Go ahead. Rabbi Scott, I'll let you go first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think one is, it's really important. We live in America where we both live amongst our friends and spread in a larger community. All religious leaders have a role to play in standing together and knowing that we stand together in spite of all differences. So to be able to identify, I have congregants who, because of issues of politics in the Middle East and Again, Imam Hassan and I disagree on Middle Eastern politics. I don't have any problem. I got plenty of Jewish friends that I disagree with on Middle Eastern politics. And I have congregants who don't like it when I identify him as my friend. And I say, look, we're either going to be friends or we're all in even more trouble than we are in. I can't only be friends with people who agree with me on important issues, but he's a good, honest person trying to do his best for himself, his family, and his community. And I'm happy to engage with him to try and change his mind on some issues because we really do disagree on a variety of important issues. But we need to stand together in the face of hatred and what it means to be a community. And we need to call it out. We need to call it out in our own community. We need to call it out when anybody who looks like me, thinks like me, speaks like me, and I would say davens in my shul. You would say pray in my institution of faith. Need to call it out when anybody makes any comments of intolerance in our own group. And we have to have good enough relationships that we can reach out and call to each other and say, do you know that? Do you know that this such and such happened? And I need you to stand with me. Not because you agree with me on everything, but because you agree with me on this. And we need to stand together. And I think that's the biggest role to be able to play. And let there be no confusion. Let there be no confusion for any of us of where we stand on the issues of intolerance, of racism, of homophobia, as misogyny, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. It's tragic how long the list is, but any flavor of hatred.
Thank you.
I really want to thank Rabbi Scott for, and I don't know if there's much for me to add, but I will say we need to start first and foremost as faith leaders to guide our congregation towards understanding the difference between having a viewpoint and letting that lead to anti-Semitic, anti-Islamic, whatever you want to add there comments. Like the Rabbi said, I mean, you may hold political views about Israel or Palestine or Kashmir or whatever else, but that's different than blaming all Palestinians for the acts of Hamas or blaming all of the people of Israel for extremist attacks against Palestinians, or so on and so on. And us as religious leaders, we need to make sure first and foremost that in our own sermons, we are preaching tolerance, we are preaching acceptance, we are preaching to our community that your religious connection with God, with your Creator, is not tied to any political decisions made. So meaning, you could be Jewish and criticize the Israeli state. You could be Muslim and criticize the Palestinian state, or lack thereof, and so on and so on. So we need to take that conversation and make sure that it's actually a spiritual conversation, away from a lot of what people have done is to misuse religion for political causes. And it's been done across the board. It's been done by people who were standing up for Christian causes, as we've seen in history, from the Spanish Inquisition to the Crusaders to the IRA and any one of you KKK. I mean, they have their own Bible studies. David Duke, you mentioned him. He has his own churches and Bible studies, and they misuse religion for political and hate causes. It has been done by extremists who were fighting for the Zionist cause. It's been done by extremists fighting for the Palestinian cause. It's been done by ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all these groups in our time, and by many others, Tamil Tigers and so on. So us as people who believe that we need to take our community and say, look, politics is not religion. You need to understand that you can hold any views you want, but don't blame Muslims or Jews or whoever else for whatever you see as a problem. You need to understand that people are people. People forget, and this is the problem, that a lot of sermons given in mosques and churches and synagogues sometimes fuel that idea that it's us against them. And we need to stand against that, understand people are individuals. People have individual views. There are Muslims who have done things that we as Muslims condemn. I'm sure there are people of the Jewish faith that Rabbi Scott would also condemn for the things they have done. And there are people who are of the Christian faith that different churches have condemned and the actions that they have taken. So for us to guide our congregation towards that type of understanding is very important. Secondly, like Rabbi Scott said, and like others have said, we need to start talking. I mean, this is another problem. There is no communication. Whether we agree or disagree on certain things, we as people who are faith leaders need to communicate. We need to work together for a better future for all of us. Because if we don't, just like we've seen in Nazi Germany or in other times, it's not just one community that gets affected. Once we give away the power to the few who are hateful, then we will see that that hate will start spilling over to other communities. So we need to say, okay, an attack against any innocent person is an attack against all of us. And I really appreciate the work of Rabbi Scott and others in standing together, Imam Taha and others as well, and working together to try to stop this kind of hatred against any community.
Thank you. And more questions are coming in, and I think we're on time as well. Another question is to both of our speakers, the Imam and the Rabbi, as houses of worship for all faiths are targets for violent extremist organizations. What are the concerns in the Jewish and the Muslim communities, and also what are both communities, what they can do to work together, the Muslim community and the Jewish community, to protect houses of worship?
Rabbi Scott, you want to go first, or you want me to take it?
You can go first. Your turn.
All right, tag, I'm it. All right, so first and foremost, what are our concerns? We don't want to get shot. That's a concern. Obviously, physical attacks of violence against mosques, synagogues, churches, Sikh temples have been going on and have been on the rise. Unfortunately, due to the rhetoric coming out from many political offices today, it has made it acceptable to make comments even that lead then to such attacks. So we are physically concerned about the safety of the people that worship in our mosques and people who worship in synagogues and churches and so on. We are taking precautions ourselves, obviously looking at the security of the mosque, and also trying to work together with other communities to make sure that if we, for example, if we find somebody in the Muslim community who may make a threatening comment against another community, that we make sure that we stop that individual and work with law enforcement to make sure that our country and everybody else stays safe. And I'm hoping, obviously, that the Jewish community and the Christian community and other communities are doing the same. Unfortunately, we do see that nowadays, especially on social media, because of the idea of trolling, the idea is that your identity is hidden, so that people make comments that are clearly factually incorrect and Islamophobic, and it gets to be somewhat accepted. It even gets retweeted by the president sometimes. So that has caused a big concern, and we are all for freedom of speech. We don't want to hamper speech, but then we also want to be vigilant as a society that when people make comments, again, like Rabbi Scott said, I mean, when you blame an entire race, religion, segment of society all together and clump them together, it's probably some xenophobic or Islamophobic or anti-Semitic or some kind of prejudice thing they're going to spew. So one of the things we're encouraging our own community and others, that when they see such comments coming, to try to stop that individual, to educate that individual, so that we don't let it fester. What we've seen in the New Zealand shooter, what we've seen in the Pittsburgh shooter, whether they've targeted mosques or synagogues, they had a social media presence where they were spewing that hate for a while, and people were tolerating it. So we encourage everybody here and others that, when in your congregation, in your circle of friends, when you hear a anti-Islamic comment, when you see Muslims being called terrorists altogether, or Jews being called, Zionist terrorists, or whatever else people use against different people of different community, whether it is the LGBTQI community or others, you need to stop that person. You need to engage that person and not let that hate fester. You need to stop that blaming on a society. And we as faith leaders and you as individuals, we all need to work together on this, because there's only so much you can do from putting cameras and hiring security and all that kind of stuff. If somebody's bent on getting in and shooting up a place of worship, unfortunately, it's just a very sad situation that we really hope to work to prevent, not just cure. So.
Yeah, lovely said. I think that one of the places that it's interesting to me, and I think it's important, is a broader sharing of best practices, even though the cultures of security and even some of the threats are different. And to his credit, in fact, Mayor Faulkner has called together interfaith groups to talk about security in places of worship, and included the regional FBI. And it's been a need sharing amongst synagogues, mosques, and churches that I credit Mayor Faulkner with doing that, because I think we think of these things in different languages, and we have a lot to learn from each other as we worry about protecting everybody. I mean, again, I have a synagogue and I worry a lot about that specific building, but I also worry about everybody's safety, and our ability to act and share together to protect all of us, I think, is part of it.
Thank you very much. Another question from one of our participants is, and I'll summarize it as much as I can, but one of the leading causes to people to join violent extremist groups and carry out violent attacks is the lack of education. And this question is to both of our presenters. What do you believe? How do you think this issue can be addressed within the educational system? In additionally to that, in recent ethnic study program curriculum passed in California is meant to address biases and hatred. However, wrongfully portrays many ethnic groups and can actually lead to a formation of more biases and hate, especially among our younger generation. So what are some of the flaws within our educational system, and how could we enhance our educational system to be a tool to serve in the prevention of violent extremism?
Rabbi Scott, you're up first.
I would love to duck the question. I think of myself as an optimist. I think of myself as, believing in the great possibilities of what tomorrow could yet bring. But the reality is, I look around where our society is today. I look around and I see a society that, 5 years ago, I was amazed at the progress that we as a society have made in my lifetime. I mean, I was born in Northern Ohio, moved to San Diego when I was 9, which was great, even though I didn't, wasn't my choice. But my mother comes from Southern Ohio, and she grew up in a world 15 minutes from white only and colored only, fill in the blank, parks and bathrooms and drinking fountains and hotels. And that just seems like a lot longer to go than just the small age gap. When I was a little child, people thought that it was morally acceptable for women to be paid less for the same job as a man. I mean, people said that, and you can look at the polling data from the early 70s. And so the amount of progress that was made in the first 40 some odd years of my lifetime, I look back on and boggled my mind. The different place in public society protected under the law for LGBTQ plus individuals, compared to even the San Diego I moved to in the 70s, was a whole different world. And I thought that, again, we weren't done. Had you talked to me 5 years ago, we certainly weren't done on sexism or racism or homophobia or anti-Semitism. It was the same list, but it appeared to me that the trajectory was only accelerating in the direction of justice. And we had to worry about those who were falling behind and not catching up as it related to partaking in the promise of justice. But I am not happy or optimistic or comfortable. I don't think that education protects against anti-Semites, because there are whole systems of education that, until we're ready to fully indoctrinate people from a federal system of values and education, which we're not ready to do because the systems that do that are in worse shape than we are, then we're really in a tough place. And I don't know. I know that we will continue to win the majority, but it only takes one person to shoot up or bomb a mosque or a synagogue, or to attack somebody, to jump somebody in a parking lot. So I don't think, again, I work with the ADL. We spend an inordinate amount of time and money locally and nationally on education programs. No Place for Hate is in over 100 middle schools and high schools in San Diego County this year. It's a brilliant, brilliant program. Those things are really, really important. And I'm pessimistic because it does not take many haters to make this program so critically important and to make all of us feel threatened. Right? And by the way, let's just be honest, if I may, that as much as we don't know what to do about how to protect against violence, violent extremism and the shooting and the bombing and all the rest, that the cultural forms of racism and anti-Semitism and sexism and homophobia that are part and parcel of every day, you think it's hard to try and figure out how to protect a house of worship from a violent bomber. Try to figure out how to create a truly just system of courts and law enforcement and prisons, how to create an economic just system. So sometimes I really feel that we have moved the arrow so far forward in the direction of a moral society. And at other times, I can't believe that this is where we are in 2020.
Beautifully said. Myself, I am a optimist, no matter what the situation is. And look, I grew up in San Diego since I was 6 or 7 or something like that. And I went to school here in public schools, and they had books that talked about Muslims worshiping a rock and Muslims having a Allah, the Muslim God, and things that were so out of whack that it was a shock. And till today, I mean, the portrayal of Muslims in public schools has been a very negative one. Much of the credit to Muslim scientists and Muslim scholars for developing of algebra and chemistry and developing the first hospital in Baghdad, and all of that has not been recorded or presented in textbooks. Not just to mention that, I mean, even if you look at the portrayal of Columbus and his work as a man who started a genocide, really, but his portrayal of being a hero on Columbus Day and what all we celebrated is still in the education system. So there's a lot of work to be done. But look, I'm an optimist. I mean, I'm not gonna wait for the school system to fix their books. Our conversation here, us sitting here, Rabbi Scott, me, you, everybody else on this call, Muhammad, this is fixing the problem. I went to school here. We read books. We took tests, and usually you took your test, you're done with it, you forgot about what you even did. But that conversation you had with your peers was what really influenced you. So if we can change where when you hear an anti-Semitic joke, you say, hey, that's not funny. When you hear anti-Arab joke, when you hear a towel head or a whatever else joke, when you hear a anti-Asian joke, when you hear a joke making fun of the LGBT community or whatever else, and you as a person say, you know what, that's not acceptable. I'm not going to laugh at that. That's not funny. I have Muslim friends, I have Jewish friends, I have Christian friends, I have friends of different gender, and that's not acceptable. I think that is going to change the conversation more than just updating books. We in our community have a very active program for education to teach history. I teach myself, and it's free of charge, and to teach history from an inclusive perspective, meaning we don't just look at history of Muslims. We don't just look at history of from a Western perspective, but look at the contributions to society made by historical figures that were, from China, from Africa, from different backgrounds and different religions. And then we realize that this is humanity. You can't say any one race is better than the other. You cannot say one race is loved by God and everybody else is not, or so on and so on. You realize that this is a common history. And once you start teaching that way, I think there will be a major change. And until the school system catches up, at least we got each other, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And this is going to be our last question. And this is to both of our participants. And what best practices or recommendations do you have, particularly for students in higher education, to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to combat violent extremism?
Should I go first?
Please.
All right. So we have in our mosque well, we have a few different programs. One is we have an open door policy. We invite our neighbors, we invite our Christian and Jewish and atheists and so on, community members that are part of the same community that we live in, to come to the mosque, to sit down with us. Again, as I mentioned earlier, due to the coronavirus pandemic, we don't have this right now, but we have every week a weekly program where we have free food. We pay for it from our own pocket, make food, make tea, and serve the community and let people come and break bread with us. And just no preaching, no trying to change anybody's ideas. Just sit down and eat. And the point of that is, once we start to get to know each other, once we start to realize, we all get hungry, we all get thirsty, we all get tired, we all got families, we got kids, that in the end, we're all humans, we're all the same. We have the same needs and desires and hopes and dreams and all that. And that's one way we're reaching out. We have other programs that we do. We invite students from different universities, different churches to come to the mosque. We go out, and again, free of charge. If anybody invites us to a synagogue or a church or a university or a high school, to go and share our faith. And again, not in a way to preach, but rather in a way to build bridges and find common ground. Other than that, we have programs also dealing with our own youth and making sure that they don't go towards extremism or hatred. We have youth programs to try to get them involved in different sports and different programs. We hope that when everybody at a grassroots level starts to involve themselves in such programs, that in the long run, this will make a big difference.
Thank you very much. Again, I very much appreciate the last question, because the one before left me feeling bad, and it was my answer. So give me a chance to now be upbeat, because for those who are educated, for those who actually by choice are part of a learning community, a community that actually thrives in difference rather than that builds up walls against the other, I think there's a lot that we can do. Again, standing together, all of those things are true. I think one of the things that for somebody who would like to be, in my humble opinion, a moral human being in our diverse society, there's an obligation to learn part of the narrative of other groups, and to learn it. Again, we are in the context of a university environment. We're not learning little kids' books, but serious learning. If you don't have a strong sense of the history of the Trail of Tears, if you don't have a strong sense of not only the history of African slavery in the United States, but the history of thousands of lynchings, when Reconstruction filled in the South and throughout the United States after the Civil War. If you don't have a strong understanding of the history of disenfranchisement of those who have the legal right to vote, then one can't ultimately function in our complicated society. It's remarkable when I sit with educated, good, honest people talking about fears of people voting who don't have a right to vote, who have no sense of the disenfranchisement of African Americans, after the Civil War, who have no sense about about the history of voter intimidation, who have no sense that voter fraud sounds like a reasonable issue, right? Nobody wants voter fraud, but if you don't understand that voter fraud happens in the context of 150 years of truly biased elections as to who can and cannot vote, or can and cannot vote freely, right? If people don't understand that women have only had the vote for less than 50% of American history, do the math, the 19th Amendment's 100 years old, less than 50% of history, then people can't really understand what it means to stand together. So we as an educated community who are brought together by higher education, I think should each take it upon ourselves, if you don't know the Matthew Shepard story, to make sure that we are educated in the history of oppression and oppressors, not just from our own families, but from our collective families. And therefore we can be a voice for change and good in this world.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. Thank you, Rabbi Scott Milsler and Imam Osman. Please visit us for more information at sdsucares.com to get more information about our next programs to come. Next week, we will still be on this topic of unpacking extremism, looking at how it impacts immigrant and refugee communities as well. So we have really great presenters for next week. I thank you so much. Please email me at ahmed@sdsu.edu if you would like a recording of this program today, and also to get further information and invitation to other programs such as next week and the week after. Thank you so much. Let's also thank our speakers for taking time out of their busy schedule. And thank you, Imam Osman. I know that you're preparing for Ramadan, which starts tomorrow. So happy Ramadan to you and all that celebrate. And thank you very much, Rabbi Scott, for taking the time to join us as well. And this program is officially adjourned for the day. If anyone has questions or would like to chat with me, I will be on here for the next 15, 20 minutes as well.
As everybody races to get out of the Zoom room. Thank you very much. Thank you for putting this together. Thank you to everybody who works in the office, even if you're not in the office. And honored to be a part of it. Whatever I can do as part of the campus community, I'm around, and this stuff really matters. And again, it doesn't get everywhere, but for everywhere it gets, it makes a difference.
Thank you.
Again, I want to thank everybody as well. And if anybody has questions, I'm still here, so feel free.